pretty sick. You feel good about your audition song? Just want to break a leg. But I would be so sad if you broke your leg.
Why not? Sophie Birnbaum?
What's wrong with my back? Talented. And ready. In case
Come on, you can talk to me. I'm not a little kid anymore.
I look at you, all I see is how much I love you.
Welcome to the channel, everyone. Today, we are going to take a detailed look at the 2026 musical teen drama film, Don't Say Good Luck. In this video, we will explore the complete story of the movie from beginning to end and explain the important events, characters, emotions, conflicts, and turning points that shape the journey. We will go through the story step by step so that even if you have not watched the film, you can understand what happens and why each major moment is important. After explaining the story, we will move into our full movie review, where we will discuss the performances, characters, musical elements, emotional moments, storytelling, direction, and overall experience of the film. We will also talk about what works well in the movie and what could have been better, while looking at how effectively the film combines teenage drama, music, family relationships, friendship, dreams, and personal struggles. But that's not all. We will also discuss the deeper message and moral of the story and what the film is trying to teach its audience about believing in yourself, facing challenges, making difficult choices, and finding the courage to move forward. Finally, we will give our overall opinion on Don't Say Good Luck and answer the big question: is this a movie you should watch, or is it one you can skip? So, if you are interested in knowing the complete story, understanding the characters, hearing our honest review, and discovering whether this 2026 film is worth your time, make sure you stay with us until the end. Let's begin our journey into Don't Say Good Luck and find out what makes this musical teen drama worth talking about. The story of Don't Say Good Luck begins by introducing Sophie Birnbaum, a teenage girl whose life revolves around her passion for theatre. Sophie is a talented and determined high school student who feels most comfortable when she is performing on stage. Theatre is not just an after-school activity for her, it is a place where she can express herself, escape everyday problems, and dream about her future. When her school announces its upcoming production of Waitress, Sophie becomes excited about the possibility of taking on an important role. Her dream becomes a reality when she is chosen to play Jenna, the lead character in the musical. For Sophie, this is a major achievement and a chance to prove that she has what it takes to become a serious performer. She immediately throws herself into rehearsals, learning her songs, practicing her lines, and trying to understand the emotional side of her character. Her teachers and fellow students begin to notice how seriously she takes the production, and Sophie becomes increasingly determined to make the performance unforgettable. However, while Sophie is enjoying one of the most exciting periods of her young life, her family is dealing with a painful reality that she does not completely understand. Sophie's mother, Elizabeth, has previously battled cancer, and everyone had hoped that the disease was finally behind them. Elizabeth tries to remain positive and supportive of her daughter, encouraging Sophie to focus on the musical and enjoy this important experience. But beneath her calm appearance, Elizabeth is facing frightening news about her health. Her cancer has returned, and the situation is much more serious than Sophie realizes. Elizabeth does not want her daughter's dreams to be destroyed by fear and sadness, so she tries to protect Sophie from the full truth for as long as possible. This creates a powerful contrast between Sophie's life at school and her life at home. At school, Sophie is preparing for bright lights, music, applause, and the excitement of performing in front of an audience. At home, her mother is quietly confronting the possibility of not being there for many of the important moments in Sophie's future. Sophie initially believes that her biggest challenge will be becoming the best possible actress and singer for the school musical, but she slowly begins to notice that something is wrong with her mother. Small changes in Elizabeth's behavior make Sophie uncomfortable, even though she cannot immediately understand what they mean. As rehearsals continue, Sophie becomes more emotionally connected to the story she is performing. The feelings in the musical begin to remind her of the complicated emotions she is experiencing in her own life. She starts discovering that acting is not only about memorizing words or singing songs. It can also be about using personal emotions to make a performance feel real. Meanwhile, Elizabeth continues trying to give Sophie a normal teenage life. She supports her daughter's ambitions and encourages her to enjoy every opportunity, even though she knows that time may be limited. Sophie is caught between the excitement of becoming the star of the school musical and the growing feeling that something serious is happening within her family. The deeper she becomes involved in the production, the more she realizes that the stage cannot completely protect her from reality. The story begins setting up its central emotional conflict. Sophie wants to move forward with her dreams, while the person she loves most is facing an uncertain future. As the opening part of the movie comes to an end, Sophie still does not fully understand how much her life is about to change. She believes she is preparing for the biggest performance of her life, but in reality, she is also beginning a much more difficult journey, one that will force her to confront love, fear, family, loss, and the importance of appreciating the moments she still has with the people she loves. As Sophie becomes more deeply involved in the school production of Waitress, the excitement surrounding the musical begins to grow. Every rehearsal brings her closer to the performance she has been dreaming about, but at the same time, the situation at home becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. Sophie has always looked at theatre as a place where everything makes sense. A script tells the actors what to say, rehearsals allow them to correct their mistakes, and eventually the curtain rises at exactly the right moment. Real life, however, does not work that way. There is no script that can tell Sophie what to say when she notices her mother's condition getting worse, and there is no rehearsal that can prepare her for the possibility of losing someone she loves. This difference between the controlled world of theatre and the unpredictable world of real life gradually becomes one of the most important ideas in Sophie's journey. At school, Sophie tries to concentrate on her responsibility as the lead performer. Playing Jenna is not easy, and she knows that everyone involved in the production is depending on her. Her teachers expect her to learn the material, understand the character, and bring genuine emotion to every scene. Her fellow students also look to her for confidence because she is now one of the central faces of the production. Sophie takes that responsibility seriously. She spends more time rehearsing, practices her songs repeatedly, and works on the emotional details of her performance. She wants to be prepared for every possible mistake because she is terrified of disappointing the people who believe in her. The closer opening night gets, the more pressure she places on herself. Her friends notice that Sophie is changing. She is spending more time thinking about rehearsals, and she sometimes seems distracted even when everyone else is joking around. Her classmates are dealing with the ordinary problems of teenage life, friendships, relationships, school expectations, and the excitement of discovering new experiences. Sophie is experiencing those things too, but there is something much heavier sitting underneath them. She knows that something is happening with her mother, even if she does not yet understand the full extent of it. That uncertainty makes ordinary moments feel strange. She can laugh with her friends 1 minute and then become quiet when she remembers something Elizabeth said or did at home. Elizabeth continues to encourage Sophie to enjoy the musical. She asks about rehearsals, listens to her daughter's stories, and tries to show enthusiasm whenever Sophie talks about the production. From Sophie's perspective, these moments are comforting, but there is also something unusual about the way her mother reacts. Elizabeth sometimes seems more interested in making memories than in talking about the future. She encourages Sophie to appreciate the present, to enjoy her friends, and to keep pursuing the things that make her happy. At first, Sophie does not think much about these comments. She assumes her mother is simply being supportive, but as time passes, the words begin to feel more meaningful. The family tries to maintain a sense of normality, but the reality of Elizabeth's illness keeps appearing in small ways. Sophie begins noticing changes that she cannot explain away. Her mother's energy is different, and there are moments when Elizabeth seems physically or emotionally exhausted. Sophie becomes more observant. She starts wondering why certain conversations stop when she enters the room and why the adults around her sometimes exchange worried looks. She does not want to believe that anything terrible is happening, because accepting that possibility would mean admitting that her family's future might not look the way she imagined. For Sophie, the hardest part is the uncertainty. If someone simply told her what was wrong, she could at least try to understand it. Instead, she feels as if she is standing outside a locked door while everyone else knows what is happening on the other side. She begins asking questions, but the answers she receives are often incomplete. Elizabeth does not want to frighten her, and other family members are equally careful about what they reveal. Their intention is to protect Sophie, but the protection also creates distance between them. Meanwhile, rehearsals become more emotionally intense. Sophie starts understanding her character in a way she did not expect. The story of Waitress deals with complicated emotions, relationships, hopes, disappointments, and the desire for a different life. As Sophie studies the character, she begins connecting those fictional emotions with her own experiences. She discovers that some of the strongest performances come from feelings that are not entirely imaginary. When she performs a difficult scene, she finds herself thinking about her mother. When she sings an emotional song, the words seem to carry a meaning beyond the musical itself. Her theatre teacher notices the change. Sophie is becoming more emotionally present on stage, but she is also carrying something heavy. The teacher wants her to understand that performing is not about forcing herself to feel a particular emotion. Instead, Sophie needs to trust herself and allow the character's feelings to come naturally. This advice becomes important because Sophie is beginning to learn that she cannot control every emotion in her life. Sometimes sadness appears without warning. Sometimes fear becomes anger. Sometimes a happy moment can suddenly be interrupted by a painful thought. The school musical gradually becomes a reflection of Sophie's emotional life. At first, she saw the production as an opportunity to become more confident and prove herself. Now it is becoming a place where she can process feelings she cannot express at home. The stage gives her permission to be vulnerable. She can cry as her character without explaining why she is crying. She can sing about heartbreak without telling anyone what is happening inside her. She can step into another person's story while quietly trying to understand her own. At home, however, Sophie cannot hide forever. One evening, the tension surrounding Elizabeth's health becomes particularly difficult for Sophie to ignore. She realizes that her mother is not simply dealing with a minor setback. There is a seriousness in the adults' conversations that makes Sophie afraid. She begins confronting the possibility she has been trying to avoid. Her mother's illness may be much more dangerous than she had been told. The thought terrifies her because Elizabeth is not just her mother. She is one of the central people in Sophie's entire world. Sophie starts thinking about all the things she has always assumed would happen. She imagines graduating from high school, becoming an adult, pursuing theatre, experiencing relationships, and eventually building a life of her own. In all those imagined futures, her mother is there somewhere. Elizabeth is supposed to watch Sophie grow up, celebrate her successes, give her advice, and be present for the major moments of her life. The possibility that those assumptions may not come true makes Sophie feel as though the future is suddenly disappearing. Yet Sophie still has to go to school the next day. That is one of the most painful aspects of her situation. Life does not stop simply because something terrible is happening. There are still classes. There are still rehearsals. Friends still expect her to laugh at jokes. Teachers still expect assignments. The musical still has to open. Sophie discovers that grief can exist alongside ordinary responsibilities. She cannot simply step away from being a teenager because her family is facing a crisis. Her friends become an important source of support, although they do not always understand what she is experiencing. Some of them continue talking about everyday teenage concerns, and Sophie sometimes feels frustrated because those problems seem so small compared with what is happening at home. But she also begins to understand that their ordinary lives are not meaningless. Their jokes, conversations, friendships, and awkward moments remind her that she is still young. She does not have to become completely serious simply because something painful is happening around her. This creates another internal conflict. Sophie feels guilty whenever she enjoys herself. If she laughs during rehearsal, part of her wonders whether she should be thinking about her mother instead. If she becomes excited about the musical, she worries that her happiness is somehow inappropriate. But Elizabeth sees things differently. She does not want Sophie to stop living because of her illness. Elizabeth's perspective becomes increasingly important. She understands that Sophie may eventually carry guilt after losing her, and she wants to prevent that guilt from controlling her daughter's future. Elizabeth wants Sophie to know that enjoying life is not a betrayal, laughing is not disrespectful, pursuing dreams is not selfish, falling in love, making friends, performing on stage, and experiencing happiness are all parts of being alive. Sophie does not immediately understand this. She is still trying to find a way to make everything normal again. She wants her mother to get better, the family to stop worrying, and the musical to become the exciting event it was supposed to be. But the more she tries to return to the old version of her life, the more she realizes that things have already changed. Her relationship with Elizabeth also begins to change. Their conversations become more meaningful because Sophie senses that time may be limited. They talk about things they might not normally discuss. Elizabeth becomes interested in Sophie's dreams and asks her what she wants from the future. Sophie talks about theatre, performing, and the possibilities she imagines for herself. These conversations sometimes make Sophie uncomfortable because they sound like the kind of conversations people have when they are preparing for a goodbye. Still, Elizabeth refuses to make every conversation about illness. She wants Sophie to remember her as a mother who lived, not simply as a person who became sick. They continue sharing ordinary moments. Those moments become increasingly valuable to Sophie because she starts realizing that memories are often created during seemingly insignificant experiences. A conversation in the kitchen, a joke, a ride home, or a quiet evening together can become something a person remembers for years. This realization begins changing Sophie. She becomes less obsessed with making the musical perfect and more interested in understanding what the experience means to her. She still wants to perform well, but she no longer sees success as simply receiving applause. She begins to understand that the performance represents a moment in her life that she may never experience in exactly the same way again. As opening night approaches, the pressure increases. The cast rehearses more frequently. Technical preparations begin, and everyone becomes focused on making the production work. For the other students, opening night is exciting and frightening because it is a chance to finally perform in front of an audience. For Sophie, however, the performance carries an additional emotional meaning. She knows her mother may be watching. That thought changes everything. Sophie starts thinking about what Elizabeth will see when she looks at her daughter on stage. She does not want her mother to see fear. She wants her to see the girl she raised, the girl who has dreams, who works hard, who loves theatre, and who is capable of standing in front of an audience even when life feels overwhelming. At the same time, Sophie realizes that she cannot protect her mother from everything any more than Elizabeth can protect her from everything. Both of them are trying to be strong for the other person. The relationship becomes almost like a silent agreement. Elizabeth wants Sophie to keep moving forward, while Sophie wants Elizabeth to stay strong. Neither one can completely control what happens next, but both can choose how they spend the time they have. As the rehearsal schedule reaches its most intense stage, Sophie begins to experience moments where the boundary between herself and her character becomes almost invisible. The words she speaks on stage begin to feel personal. The songs become more emotional. The story of another woman trying to understand her life starts reminding Sophie of her own fears and hopes. Her teacher notices that Sophie has found something authentic in the role. What Sophie does not fully realize yet is that the emotional power of her performance is coming from her willingness to acknowledge what she is afraid of. Instead of pushing the pain away, she is beginning to transform it into something meaningful. This does not mean Sophie has accepted what is happening completely. She still has moments of anger and denial. She still hopes for a miracle. She still wants more time with her mother. She still wishes that the cancer could simply disappear. and that the family could return to the life they once knew. But she is slowly learning that acceptance does not mean giving up hope. It means understanding reality while continuing to love, dream, and live. As the story moves closer to the musical's opening performance, Sophie finds herself standing at a turning point. The girl who initially thought the biggest challenge of the year would be playing the lead role is now facing a much larger emotional challenge. She must learn how to be present in the moment without constantly fearing what will happen next. Coming performance will test everything she has learned. For Sophie, the stage is no longer simply a place to perform. It has become a place where she will have to confront her emotions, honor her relationship with her mother, and discover what it really means to keep living when life does not follow the script she expected. And as the curtain prepares to rise, Sophie begins to understand one of the most important lessons of her journey. Sometimes you cannot change the ending, but you can still decide how honestly and courageously you live the story. That comes before it. As Sophie moves deeper into the final stages of preparation for the school production of Waitress, the emotional pressure surrounding her becomes stronger. The excitement of opening night is everywhere at school, but Sophie no longer experiences the upcoming performance as simply a fun teenage achievement. Her mother's illness has changed the way she looks at everything. The musical is still important to her, but now every rehearsal reminds her that life outside the theatre is moving forward in a direction she cannot control. Sophie has always believed that if she worked hard enough, practiced enough, and prepared carefully enough, she could overcome almost any problem. But her mother's condition forces her to confront a painful reality. Some things cannot be fixed through determination alone. At school, Sophie tries to remain focused. Her teachers and fellow cast members are depending on her, and she does not want her personal problems to affect the production. She continues attending rehearsals, learning her lines, practicing songs, and working on the emotional details of her character. However, there are moments when her mind suddenly drifts away from the stage. A simple line can remind her of something her mother said. A song about relationships can make her think about the possibility of losing Elizabeth. Even the idea of performing in front of a large audience becomes emotionally complicated because Sophie knows that her mother may be watching her. The more Sophie learns about her character, the more she realizes that acting can become a way of understanding herself. She begins to recognize emotions that she previously tried to avoid. Fear, sadness, anger, hope, and love are no longer separate feelings for her. They exist together. She can be excited about opening night and terrified about her mother's future at exactly the same time. She can laugh with her friends and still feel a heavy sadness inside. She can look forward to the future while being afraid of what the future might take away. This emotional contradiction becomes one of the most important parts of Sophie's development. Elizabeth also notices that her daughter is struggling. Although she does not always know exactly what Sophie is thinking, she understands that Sophie is beginning to see through the attempts to protect her. Elizabeth has tried to keep the atmosphere at home as normal as possible, but she realizes that Sophie is old enough to understand that something serious is happening. Instead of allowing fear to completely control their relationship, Elizabeth begins encouraging Sophie to talk more openly about her feelings. Their conversations become more honest. Sophie asks questions that she has been afraid to ask before. She wants to understand what is happening, but she also wants reassurance that everything will eventually be okay. Elizabeth cannot give her the answer she wants. That is one of the hardest realities in the story. A parent can comfort a child, but sometimes a parent cannot promise a happy ending. Elizabeth therefore focuses on something she can give Sophie: perspective. She reminds Sophie that life cannot be measured only by the difficult things that happen to us. There are still beautiful moments, meaningful relationships, dreams, laughter, music, and memories. Elizabeth does not want Sophie to spend whatever time they have left together worrying about the moment when that time will end. She wants her daughter to experience the present. For Sophie, this advice is difficult to accept. She is still young, and part of her wants certainty. She wants to know how much time they have. She wants to know what will happen next. She wants to know whether her mother will be there for her future achievements. But life does not give her those answers. Instead, Sophie begins learning to appreciate smaller moments. A conversation with her mother suddenly feels more important. A rehearsal with her friends becomes something she wants to remember. A joke that would normally seem unimportant becomes meaningful because it happens during a difficult period of her life. Sophie starts realizing that people often do not know which moments will become their most important memories until much later. Meanwhile, the musical continues moving toward opening night. The cast is becoming more confident, but the pressure is also increasing. Everyone wants the production to succeed. Sophie feels responsible for making sure nothing goes wrong, yet her teacher encourages her not to become obsessed with perfection. A live performance can never be completely perfect. Mistakes happen, unexpected things happen, and performers have to continue. That lesson begins to mirror Sophie's life. She cannot make her life perfect. She cannot rehearse the future. She cannot prevent every painful event. What she can do is respond to what happens and keep moving. During one rehearsal, Sophie reaches a particularly emotional moment in the production. Instead of simply acting the scene, she allows her real emotions to influence her performance. For the first time, she does not try to hide the sadness she has been carrying. She uses it to understand her character. The result is powerful enough that the people around her notice a change. Sophie begins to realize that her pain does not necessarily make her weaker. It can also make her more empathetic, more honest, and more connected to other people. Her friends also begin understanding that something deeper is happening in Sophie's life. Some may not know exactly how to respond, but their presence becomes important. Sophie learns that support does not always come in the form of perfect advice. Sometimes it comes from someone simply sitting beside you, listening, or helping you get through an ordinary day. This is particularly meaningful because Sophie initially believes she has to handle everything herself. She wants to be strong for her mother, strong for the musical, and strong for her friends. But eventually, she learns that strength does not mean pretending that nothing hurts. Sometimes being strong means admitting that you are frightened and allowing other people to help you. At home, Elizabeth continues trying to give Sophie memories that will stay with her. She wants their relationship to be about more than illness. They talk about Sophie's future, her dreams, and the kind of person she wants to become. Elizabeth encourages her daughter to continue pursuing theatre even if life becomes difficult. She does not want Sophie to abandon her ambitions out of guilt. This becomes especially important because Sophie starts wondering whether it is selfish to focus on her own dreams while her mother is sick. Elizabeth challenges that idea. She wants Sophie to understand that loving someone does not mean giving up your own life for them. The message begins to sink in. Sophie does not have to choose between loving her mother and pursuing her dreams. She can do both. As opening night approaches, Sophie becomes increasingly determined to give the performance everything she has. She knows that her mother may be in the audience, and that thought gives her both courage and fear. She wants to make Elizabeth proud, but she also realizes that the performance cannot change what is happening medically. For the first time, Sophie stops thinking of the musical as something she must use to prove herself. Instead, she begins seeing it as a gift, a moment she can share with the people she loves. The theatre itself becomes almost symbolic. Behind the curtain, everyone is nervous and preparing. Costumes are being checked, microphones are tested, and performers review their lines. Everything feels controlled and organized. But beyond the curtain is an audience, and once the show begins, anything can happen. Sophie understands that this is what life feels like. You prepare as much as possible, but eventually you have to step forward. On the day of the performance, Sophie's emotions become overwhelming. She thinks about everything that has happened since she first learned it. She had been chosen for the role. At the beginning, she was excited simply because she had achieved something she wanted. Now the same achievement carries a completely different meaning. She thinks about her mother. She thinks about the possibility of future memories that Elizabeth may not be present for. She thinks about how quickly childhood is passing. She thinks about the things she once took for granted. And she realizes that perhaps she has been so focused on what might disappear that she has forgotten to appreciate what is still here. Elizabeth's encouragement begins to make sense. The purpose is not to pretend that the future is guaranteed. The purpose is to live honestly in the present. When Sophie prepares to step onto the stage, she is still scared. She has not magically become fearless. She is still a teenager facing something far beyond her control. but she is no longer trying to escape her emotions, she is ready to carry them with her. The performance begins, and Sophie enters the world of the musical. For a while, the audience sees only the character she is playing, but beneath the performance is everything Sophie has experienced. Every line has an emotional weight that did not exist before. Every song carries memories of her mother. Every moment on stage represents her struggle to understand what it means to love someone while knowing that life is temporary. The people watching may see a talented young performer, but Sophie knows that she is doing something much more personal. She is expressing everything she cannot easily say in conversation. As the performance continues, Sophie becomes increasingly confident. She stops worrying about whether every detail is perfect. Instead, she focuses on being present. She listens to the other performers, responds naturally, and allows the emotions of the story to move through her. The stage lights make it impossible for her to see every person in the audience, but she knows Elizabeth is somewhere out there. That thought becomes enough. For Sophie, this is no longer about receiving applause or proving herself. It is about sharing something meaningful with her mother while she still can. The emotional intensity reaches its highest point when Sophie performs one of the musical's most powerful songs. The song, particularly She Used to Be Mine, becomes deeply connected to the feelings she has been struggling with throughout the story. Instead of simply performing the song as an actress, Sophie allows herself to feel the grief, love, fear, and hope that have been building inside her. Her voice and expression communicate what words cannot. She is afraid of losing her mother. She loves her mother. She is angry that life can be unfair. She is grateful for the time they have shared, and she is beginning to understand that these feelings can exist together. When the performance finally moves toward its conclusion, Sophie is no longer the same girl who first walked into the audition hoping to get a role. She has gained something far more important than a lead part in a school musical. She has gained a new understanding of herself and of the relationship she has with her mother. The audience responds to the performance, but the applause is not the most important thing for Sophie. What matters is the connection she has created. She has stepped onto the stage carrying fear, and she has walked off it carrying courage. The musical cannot cure Elizabeth. It cannot guarantee Sophie's future. It cannot erase the pain waiting ahead, but it has given Sophie a way to face that pain without allowing it to completely define her daughters. The story moves toward its final emotional moments. Sophie begins to understand the real lesson her mother has been trying to teach her all along. Life does not need to be perfect to be meaningful. Some chapters will contain happiness, others will contain heartbreak, and sometimes both will exist in the same chapter. Sophie cannot control how the story ends, but she can choose how she lives it. And as the curtain falls, the girl who once believed that everything could be fixed through preparation finally understands that some of life's most important moments are not about controlling the outcome. They are about being present, loving deeply, and having the courage to continue when the next scene is unknown. As the story moves into its most emotional stage, Sophie is no longer simply preparing for a school musical. The production of Waitress has become deeply connected to everything happening in her personal life. What began as an exciting opportunity to play the lead role has gradually turned into an emotional journey that forces Sophie to look at her family, her mother's illness, her own fears, and the future she once took for granted. Opening night is approaching, and everyone at school is focused on making the production successful. But for Sophie, the meaning of the performance has changed completely. She is still nervous about forgetting a line, missing a cue, or making a mistake on stage, but those fears are no longer the biggest things on her mind. Her greatest fear is what might happen to her mother and how much time they may have left together. Sophie tries to keep herself focused on rehearsals, because staying busy feels easier than thinking about what is happening at home. Every day brings another rehearsal, another song, another scene, and another reminder that the performance is getting closer. Her theatre teacher continues, pushing her to become more confident and emotionally open in the role. At first, Sophie thinks that being a good performer means controlling everything. She wants every line to sound perfect and every movement to happen exactly as planned. But her teacher begins helping her understand that real performances are not always about perfection. The strongest moments often come when an actor allows genuine emotion to enter the performance. That lesson becomes especially meaningful for Sophie because she is experiencing emotions that she cannot control. Sometimes she is hopeful, sometimes angry, sometimes frightened, and sometimes completely exhausted. She does not know how to organize all of these feelings. At school, she tries to behave like an ordinary teenager, but the situation at home is always somewhere in the back of her mind. Her friends continue to be part of her life, and their presence becomes important because they remind Sophie that she is still allowed to have a normal teenage experience. They talk about school, relationships, rehearsals, and their own problems. Sophie occasionally feels guilty for enjoying these moments, believing that she should be more serious because of her mother's illness. But gradually, she starts realizing that happiness does not disappear simply because something painful is happening. A person can be scared and still laugh. A person can be grieving and still enjoy music. A person can be worried about tomorrow and still appreciate today. This becomes one of the most important emotional lessons Sophie learns. At home, her relationship with Elizabeth continues to change. The two of them have always been close, but the possibility of losing her mother makes Sophie pay attention to things she previously ignored. She notices the way Elizabeth looks at her when she talks about the musical. She notices how proud her mother is of her. She begins to understand that Elizabeth is not simply trying to protect her from bad news. She is also trying to prepare Sophie emotionally for a future in which she may have to continue without her. That realization is painful. Sophie wants her mother to promise that she will be there for everything. She wants Elizabeth to watch her graduate, see her pursue theatre, meet the people Sophie will eventually love, and experience the future that every teenager imagines sharing with a parent. But Elizabeth cannot make those promises. Instead, she encourages Sophie to focus on what they have rather than constantly fearing what they might lose. At first, Sophie finds this frustrating. She does not want a lesson about appreciating the present. She wants a solution. She wants her mother's illness to disappear. She wants the doctors to have better news. She wants life to return to the way it was before cancer entered their family. But eventually, Sophie understands that neither she nor her mother can control everything. The approaching musical becomes a kind of deadline. Sophie begins thinking about what she wants Elizabeth to see when she watches her perform. She does not want her mother to see a frightened daughter who is constantly worried about the future. She wants her mother to see the person she helped raise, a young woman with dreams, talent, determination, and the ability to continue moving forward. This thought gives Sophie new confidence. During rehearsals, she begins performing differently. She is no longer trying to imitate an emotion. Instead, she allows her own experiences to inform the character. When the character experiences sadness, Sophie understands it. When the character hopes for something better, Sophie understands that too. When the character feels trapped by circumstances beyond her control, Sophie recognizes that feeling from her own life. The line between Sophie and the character becomes increasingly thin. Her theatre teacher notices this transformation. The teacher understands that Sophie has found something emotionally honest inside the role. Rather than telling Sophie to suppress her personal feelings, she encourages her to use them carefully. Theatre can be a safe place for emotions, but Sophie must also remember that she is not responsible for carrying the entire production alone. This advice helps Sophie understand another important lesson. She does not have to be strong every second. For much of the story, Sophie has tried to protect everyone else. She wants to avoid worrying her mother. She does not want her friends to feel uncomfortable. She does not want the production to suffer because of her personal problems. But hiding pain does not make the pain disappear. Eventually, Sophie begins allowing herself to be honest. She admits that she is scared. She admits that she does not know what the future will look like. She admits that she does not want to lose her mother. And most importantly, she admits that she still wants to live her life. These admissions do not make her weaker. They make her more emotionally mature. Elizabeth also understands that Sophie is changing. Instead of trying to protect her from every painful truth, she begins sharing more with her daughter. Their conversations become less about avoiding difficult subjects and more about appreciating the relationship they already have. Elizabeth encourages Sophie to keep pursuing theatre. She tells her, in her own way, that her daughter's future should not stop because of her illness. Sophie initially struggles with this idea because she feels that moving forward might mean leaving her mother behind. Elizabeth wants her to understand that continuing to live is not abandoning the people we love. This becomes especially powerful because Sophie is beginning to imagine a future that does not include Elizabeth in the same way. The thought is heartbreaking, but it also motivates Sophie to make the present more meaningful. She starts paying attention to small moments. She listens more carefully when her mother speaks. She becomes less impatient during ordinary family conversations. She understands that memories are not created only during major events. Sometimes the moments that stay with us forever are simple ones. A meal together, a conversation, a laugh, a hug, a quiet evening, a mother watching her daughter prepare for a performance. Sophie begins realizing that she does not need to know exactly how much time she has in order to appreciate the time she is given. Finally, opening night arrives. The atmosphere at the theater is completely different from an ordinary rehearsal. There is excitement everywhere. The cast is getting into costumes. Technical staff are preparing the stage. Teachers are making final checks. And the audience is beginning to arrive. Everyone has spent weeks preparing for this moment. Sophie stands backstage and tries to control her breathing. She thinks about the first day she auditioned. She remembers how excited she was when she received the lead role. She remembers the rehearsals. She remembers the moments when she wanted to give up. She remembers her mother. And she realizes how much has changed. The performance is no longer simply about proving that she deserves the role. It is about expressing everything she has experienced. When Sophie steps onto the stage, she initially feels the familiar nervousness of performing in front of an audience. But after the first moments, she begins settling into the character. The lights are bright, the audience is quiet, and the story begins moving forward. For the first time in a long while, Sophie feels completely present. She is not thinking about tomorrow. She is not thinking about the worst possible outcome. She is not trying to predict what will happen next. She is simply performing. And somewhere in the audience, her mother is watching. That knowledge gives Sophie strength. As the musical progresses, the emotional connection between the story on stage and Sophie's real life becomes stronger. The characters' struggles begin reflecting Sophie's own experiences. The songs become more than musical numbers. They become emotional expressions of everything Sophie has been carrying. One of the most important moments comes when Sophie performs. She used to be mine. The song takes on a deeply personal meaning for her. Instead of treating it as another part of the show, Sophie allows the emotion behind the song to come through her performance. She thinks about her mother. She thinks about how quickly life can change. She thinks about the girl she was before cancer became part of her family's story. She thinks about the future she imagined. She thinks about all the things she cannot control. And she finally allows herself to feel everything. There is no attempt to hide the sadness. There is no attempt to pretend that everything will be okay. There is only honesty. Sophie's performance becomes powerful because she is no longer separating acting from reality. She has discovered that the emotions she was afraid of can also become a source of strength. Her pain has not disappeared, but she has found a way to express it. The audience sees a moving performance, but for Sophie, the moment is much more personal. She is speaking to her mother without directly speaking to her. She is saying that she loves her. She is saying that she is afraid. She is saying that she understands more now. And she is saying that she will try to keep going. When the song ends, Sophie has a moment of emotional stillness. The audience responds, but she is not focused on applause. Her attention is on what the performance means to her. For years, she may have believed that success meant getting applause, receiving praise, or becoming a great performer. Now she understands that performance can also be about connection. The stage allows her to communicate something she might never have been able to explain in an ordinary conversation. As the rest of the production continues, Sophie becomes more comfortable. She stops worrying about perfection and begins trusting herself. If something is slightly imperfect, she does not panic. She simply continues. This is symbolic of the larger lesson she is learning. Life will not always go according to plan. There will be mistakes. There will be unexpected moments. There will be things we cannot fix, but we still have to continue. The performance eventually reaches its final scenes. Sophie has changed emotionally during the course of the show. The girl who entered the theater frightened and uncertain now understands that she can face difficult emotions without allowing them to destroy her. When the final moment arrives, the curtain closes and the audience applauds. Sophie takes in the sound. For a brief moment, everything feels still. She has done it. The performance is over. But more importantly, she has survived one of the most emotionally difficult experiences of her life. Backstage, the atmosphere is filled with excitement. The cast members are celebrating, congratulating one another, and talking about the performance. Sophie is happy, but her happiness is complicated by everything she has been through. She knows the musical is only one moment. The real story continues after the curtain closes. Sophie eventually reconnects with her mother, and the emotional importance of that moment becomes clear. Elizabeth is proud of her daughter. She has watched Sophie step onto the stage carrying fear and walk through the performance with courage. For Sophie, seeing her mother there matters more than any applause. She realizes that she may not be able to control how much time they have together, but she can control how she spends that time. The experience has also changed how she thinks about her future. She is still interested in theatre. She still wants to perform. She still has dreams. But those dreams are no longer about escaping reality. They are about living fully within it. Sophie has learned that ambition and grief can exist together. She can miss someone and still smile. She can be afraid and still be brave. She can love her mother deeply and still build a future for herself. And she can continue living without feeling that moving forward means forgetting. The emotional climax of the story therefore does not come from defeating Elizabeth's illness. There is no simple miracle that erases the family's problems. Instead, the climax comes from Sophie's emotional transformation. At the beginning, she believed that preparation could protect her from uncertainty. Now she understands that uncertainty is part of life. She cannot rehearse the future. She cannot control every ending. She cannot make every painful event disappear. But she can choose to be present. She can choose to love. She can choose to remember. And she can choose to keep dreaming. This is what makes the musical so important to her. It has given her more than a role. It has given her a way to understand herself. As Sophie looks back on the experience, she realizes that the performance she once considered the biggest challenge of her life was actually preparing her for something much larger. She entered the production wanting to become a better performer. She leaves it as a more emotionally mature person. The stage has taught her something that no rehearsal could have taught her. Sometimes courage is not about being certain that everything will work out. Courage is continuing even when you are not certain. And as Sophie moves forward, she carries the memory of the performance, her mother's support, and everything she has learned with her. The curtain may have fallen, but Sophie's story is far from over. For the first time, she understands that life itself is a performance without a complete script. We do not always know what the next scene will bring. We cannot always choose the circumstances we are given, but we can choose how we respond. And Sophie is finally ready to face whatever comes next. After the school musical reaches its emotional high point, Sophie begins to understand that the performance was only one part of a much larger journey. She entered the production believing that getting the lead role would be the biggest challenge she would face. But by this stage she has learned that the real challenge is not performing in front of an audience. It is learning how to continue living while carrying the fear of losing someone she loves. The musical has given her a temporary escape, but it has also forced her to confront feelings that she had been trying to keep hidden. Sophie now sees her relationship with her mother differently, and she begins to understand that the time they spend together matters more than she once realized. The story's central situation remains grounded in the contrast between Sophie's teenage world and the painful reality at home. Netflix describes Sophie as a student ready for the spotlight whose home life suddenly becomes more dramatic than the stage, while recent reporting confirms that her mother's cancer has returned and that Elizabeth has been trying to protect her daughter from the emotional consequences. In the aftermath of the performance, Sophie does not immediately feel the kind of uncomplicated happiness she expected. She has accomplished something important, and the people around her are proud of her. But she knows that the applause cannot solve the problem waiting at home. The experience has changed the way she looks at success. Earlier, she wanted everyone to recognize her talent. She wanted to prove that she deserved the lead and show that she could handle the pressure of being the center of attention. Now, however, She realizes that success is not always about being the best person in the room. Sometimes success means having the courage to face something painful without allowing it to destroy the person you are becoming. This realization also changes her relationship with her father and the rest of her family. Sophie begins paying closer attention to the people around her because she understands that everyone is dealing with the situation differently. Her father has his own fears, but he also has the responsibility of trying to keep the family functioning. Sophie can see that the adults are attempting to protect one another while also trying to protect her. For a teenager, seeing parents as vulnerable human beings can be a major turning point. Sophie has always known her parents as the people who provide answers and stability. Now she understands that they do not have every answer either. They are frightened too, and sometimes they are simply trying to get through one day at a time. That realization makes Sophie more mature, but it does not suddenly make everything easy. She still has moments when she becomes angry. There are times when she wonders why this is happening to her family. She can become frustrated when people tell her to stay positive, because positivity cannot remove the fear she is carrying. She wants honesty, but she also wants hope. She wants to understand what is happening without having to imagine the worst possible outcome every minute of the day. Elizabeth understands this conflict. She knows that Sophie is growing up emotionally much faster than either of them expected. Instead of trying to give her daughter a perfect answer, Elizabeth begins emphasizing the importance of the life Sophie still has ahead of her. She wants Sophie to continue making plans. She wants her to continue thinking about theater, friendships, school, and the future. Most importantly, she does not want Sophie to feel guilty for being happy. This becomes one of the film's most powerful ideas. Happiness and grief are not opposites that have to take turns. They can exist at the same time. Sophie can be worried about her mother and still laugh with her friends. She can cry at home and then walk onto a stage the next morning. She can be afraid of losing someone and still be excited about what comes next. Her emotions do not cancel one another out. The experience also changes Sophie's attitude toward her friends. Earlier, she sometimes felt disconnected from them because their problems seemed insignificant compared with what she was dealing with. Now she understands that everyone experiences life from their own perspective. A teenage argument may seem small to an adult, but that does not mean the feelings involved are fake. Sophie begins becoming more patient with the people around her. She listens more carefully and judges less quickly. Her own struggle has made her more empathetic. Her friendships also give her a sense of normality. There are still jokes, awkward conversations, school drama, and romantic feelings. These ordinary experiences remind Sophie that she is still a teenager. She does not have to become completely defined by her mother's illness. She is still allowed to discover who she is. That idea becomes particularly important when Sophie thinks about theater. She has spent so much time wondering whether pursuing her passion is selfish that she almost forgets why she loves it. But Elizabeth's encouragement helps her understand that following her dreams is not a rejection of her family. If anything, it is one of the things that makes her mother proud. Sophie begins looking beyond the immediate crisis. She starts imagining what she might do after high school. She thinks about performing, perhaps continuing with theater, and about the person she wants to become. These dreams are no longer abstract fantasies. They have become something she feels responsible for protecting. The musical has shown Sophie that she can stand in front of an audience even when she is afraid. Now she must learn to apply that courage to life outside the theater. One of the most important changes is that Sophie becomes less interested in pretending everything is fine. Before, she often hid her emotions because she thought showing sadness would make things harder for everyone else. Now she realizes that honesty can actually bring people closer. When she is frightened, she can say that she is frightened. When she needs support, she can ask for it. When she wants to spend time with her mother, she does not need a special reason. The family begins creating memories deliberately, even if they do not always say so out loud. A simple family activity can carry more emotional weight than it once did. Sophie becomes more aware of the little things her mother does. She notices her expressions, her sense of humor, and the way she reacts to Sophie's stories. These details become precious because Sophie understands that memories are built from ordinary moments. This is where the movie's bittersweet tone becomes especially strong. It does not treat every moment as tragedy. Instead, it shows how ordinary happiness can become incredibly meaningful when the future is uncertain. A family dinner can be funny, a conversation can be awkward, a day can be completely normal. And yet, because Sophie is now aware of how fragile life can be, she appreciates these experiences differently. Elizabeth, meanwhile, continues trying to make sure Sophie does not become trapped by fear. Her goal is not to convince Sophie that nothing bad will happen. Her goal is to convince her that even when something bad happens, life does not completely end. Sophie will continue growing, and she will continue becoming the person Elizabeth has always hoped she would become. This is difficult for Sophie to accept because part of her wants to freeze time. She wants to keep the family exactly as it is. She wants the version of the future where her mother is present for every important milestone. But she gradually understands that nobody can freeze time, even when they desperately want to. The title "Don't Say Good Luck" takes on an increasingly emotional meaning in this context. The phrase is connected to the world of performance, where actors traditionally avoid saying good luck before going on stage. But the film uses that theatrical idea as part of a larger metaphor. Life does not provide guarantees. You cannot simply wish someone good luck and know that everything will turn out perfectly. Sometimes you have to step into uncertainty without knowing the ending.
Sophie has already done that on stage. Now she has to do it in life. The experience also allows Sophie to see her mother not only as someone who is sick, but as a complete person. Elizabeth has dreams, fears, memories, humor, and a history that existed long before Sophie's current crisis. This makes their relationship deeper. Sophie becomes interested in her mother's experiences and begins asking questions that she might not have asked before. Those conversations help Sophie understand that parents are not simply parents. They are people who had their own childhoods, ambitions, mistakes, friendships, and dreams. Thinking about Elizabeth in this way helps Sophie appreciate her as an individual, rather than only as the person who takes care of her. At the same time, Sophie begins understanding something about herself. She realizes that her personality has been shaped by her relationship with her mother. Her confidence, sensitivity, humor, and determination are all connected to the people who raised her. Even if circumstances change, those qualities remain part of her. This becomes a source of comfort. Sophie cannot guarantee that she will never feel grief. She cannot guarantee that she will always be strong. But she can carry the lessons her mother has given her. The emotional aftermath of the musical therefore becomes less about the show itself and more about what Sophie takes from the experience. She has learned to express herself. She has learned that vulnerability can be powerful. She has learned that mistakes do not destroy a performance. She has learned that people need one another. Most importantly, she has learned that life cannot be rehearsed. Every new moment is performed for the first time. This understanding changes the way she approaches the days that follow. She becomes more willing to say what she feels. She spends more time with the people she loves. She does not stop worrying about her mother, but she no longer allows that worry to prevent her from enjoying the present. There are still difficult conversations ahead. There are still moments when the reality of Elizabeth's illness becomes impossible to ignore. But Sophie is better prepared emotionally than she was at the beginning. She understands that she does not have to solve everything. She only has to be there. For Elizabeth, having Sophie beside her is equally important. She does not need her daughter to become a caretaker or to stop being a teenager. What she wants is for Sophie to continue being Sophie. That means going to school. It means laughing with friends. It means pursuing theater. It means making mistakes. It means having dreams. It means falling in love someday. It means becoming an adult. And most importantly, it means living. The movie's emotional power comes from the fact that Sophie is not given a simple solution. The story does not suggest that love can magically eliminate illness or that positive thinking can prevent loss. Instead, it
focuses on the emotional choices people make when they cannot control circumstances. That approach is consistent with the film's reported inspiration. Writer Laura Hankin drew on her own teenage experience of performing in a school musical while her mother was dealing with terminal cancer. Although the finished movie fictionalizes the setting and characters, Sophie therefore becomes a representation of a teenager learning one of life's most difficult lessons earlier than expected. Sometimes we cannot choose what happens to us, but we can choose whether fear will prevent us from living. As part 5 comes to an end, Sophie is standing at the beginning of a new emotional chapter. She is still a daughter worried about her mother, still a teenager trying to understand relationships and friendship, and still a young performer discovering her talent. But she is no longer the same frightened girl who believed that everything had to go according to plan. She has learned that life is unpredictable. She has learned that love can make moments more meaningful. She has learned that sadness does not have to erase happiness. And she has learned that continuing to dream is not a betrayal of the people she loves. The stage may have been the place where Sophie first discovered her courage, but now she must carry that courage into the rest of her life. The applause has faded, the lights have gone down, and the performance is over. What remains is the real story, the relationship between a daughter and her mother, the memories they are creating together, and Sophie's decision to keep moving forward even when she cannot see what the next chapter will bring. After the school musical, Sophie enters a new phase of her life. The excitement of the performance slowly fades, but the emotions it awakened inside her remain. She has changed during the journey, and she now looks at her family, her friends, and her own future differently. At the beginning of the story, Sophie believed that the most important thing was achieving her goals and proving herself on stage. Now she understands that success means very little if you are unable to appreciate the people and moments that make life meaningful. Her mother's illness remains the painful reality at the center of her life, but Sophie is beginning to find a healthier way of dealing with the uncertainty surrounding it. Sophie still has difficult days. Sometimes she wakes up feeling hopeful and tries to focus on school and her future, while on other days the fear returns without warning. A simple reminder of her mother's condition can completely change her mood. She may be talking with a friend one moment and suddenly become quiet after remembering something from home. She realizes that there is no simple way to move through grief or fear. Some days are easier than others, and she slowly stops judging herself for having difficult emotions. Her relationship with Elizabeth becomes even more meaningful during this period. The musical also continues to influence the way Sophie thinks. She remembers what happened during the performance and the feeling of standing under the lights. She remembers how nervous she was before stepping onto the stage and how that fear disappeared once she began performing. She realizes that the same principle can apply to life. Sometimes fear becomes overwhelming because we spend too much time imagining what might happen. The only way to move forward is to take the next step. Sophie cannot see the entire future, but she does not need to. She only needs to take the next step. This becomes especially important when she starts thinking about what will happen after high school. The future that once seemed obvious now feels uncertain. She realizes that growing up means accepting that plans can change. The person she becomes may be different from the person she currently imagines. That is not necessarily something to fear. Elizabeth wants Sophie to understand this too. She encourages her daughter not to measure her life only by achievements. Getting a particular role, attending a particular school, or following a particular career path can be meaningful, but these things are not the entire definition of a successful life. Relationships matter, experiences matter, kindness matters, the ability to appreciate the present matters. Sophie begins seeing the world through this broader perspective. One evening, she and Elizabeth have a quiet conversation about the future. Sophie admits that she is scared. She does not want to lose her mother, and she does not know how she will handle life if that happens. Elizabeth does not try to dismiss her fear. Instead, she listens. She allows Sophie to say the things she has been carrying inside. This honesty brings them closer. Sophie finally realizes that she does not need to protect Elizabeth by pretending that she is not afraid. Elizabeth is her mother, but she is also a person experiencing fear of her own. Their relationship becomes more equal. emotionally because they are able to acknowledge their feelings instead of hiding them. The conversation does not magically solve anything. The illness remains. The future remains uncertain, but something important has changed. Sophie no longer feels completely alone inside her fear. She understands that uncertainty is not the same as hopelessness. There can be uncertainty and still be love. There can be uncertainty and still be happiness. There can be uncertainty and still be a future worth imagining. This realization helps Sophie continue with her life. She begins looking for new opportunities in theatre. The experience of Waitress has shown her that performing is something she genuinely loves. She is no longer interested in theatre simply because she wants attention or applause. She understands how powerful storytelling can be. A song, a scene, or a character can help people express emotions that they cannot otherwise explain. For Sophie, that discovery becomes part of her identity. She starts thinking about the kind of performer she wants to become. She wants to tell stories honestly. She wants to make audiences feel something. She wants to use her experiences to understand characters rather than simply imitate them. Her mother's influence remains part of that ambition. At the same time, Sophie learns that she should not turn her mother's illness into the only source of meaning in her life. She does not want her future to be defined solely by tragedy. She wants to remember the difficult experiences, but she also wants to remember the laughter and love that existed alongside them. That balance becomes central to her growth. Sophie begins collecting memories without consciously realizing that she's doing it. She remembers the way her mother reacts to certain jokes. She remembers conversations about theatre. She remembers advice Elizabeth has given her. She remembers the moments when her mother encouraged her to keep going. These memories become emotional anchors. Whenever Sophie becomes afraid, she can return to those lessons. Whenever she doubts herself, she can remember her mother's belief in her. Whenever she feels guilty for being happy, she can remember that Elizabeth wanted her to live fully. This is how Elizabeth's influence becomes larger than her physical presence. Sophie also begins understanding that grief is not something that simply disappears after one difficult moment. It changes over time. Some days may feel normal, while other days may bring everything back. She does not need to be ashamed of that. Emotional healing is not a straight line. The film's message becomes increasingly clear. The goal is not to forget pain, but to learn how to carry it. Sophie is learning exactly that. She carries her fear. She carries her love. She carries her dreams. She carries the memories she has already made. And she continues walking forward. There are still moments when she wishes she could return to the beginning of the story, before she knew how serious her mother's illness was. But she understands that she cannot go backward. The only direction available is forward. That realization echoes the theatre metaphor that has been present throughout the film. Once a performance begins, the actors cannot stop the story simply because something unexpected happens. They have to continue. If they forget a line, they improvise. If something goes wrong, they adapt. The show continues. Life is similar. You cannot always control the script, but you can decide how you respond to the unexpected moments. Sophie has become better at improvising. She no longer demands certainty before allowing herself to be happy. She no longer believes that enjoying a normal teenage moment means she is ignoring her mother. She no longer believes that pursuing her dreams is selfish, and she no longer believes that being afraid means she is weak. Instead, she understands that courage and fear can exist together. This emotional growth becomes the true result of everything she has experienced. The story also emphasizes the importance of family communication. Sophie learns that keeping painful information hidden does not necessarily protect someone. Sometimes honesty, even when painful, allows people to support one another more effectively. Elizabeth's desire to protect Sophie came from love, but Sophie eventually needed honesty in order to process what was happening. Their relationship becomes stronger because they begin communicating more openly. Sophie can ask questions. Elizabeth can share her feelings. Neither of them has to pretend, and although neither knows exactly what the future will bring, they can face it together. As the story moves toward its final emotional stage, Sophie begins understanding that the title, "Don't Say Good Luck," carries a deeper meaning than the theatrical tradition. It represents the impossibility of guaranteeing that everything will work out. Nobody can promise Sophie a perfect future. Nobody can tell her that her family will never experience another painful moment. But the absence of certainty does not mean the absence of hope. Hope, Sophie learns, is not necessarily believing that everything will happen exactly as you want. Sometimes hope means believing that you will find a way to continue no matter what happens. That is the kind of hope Elizabeth wants to give her daughter. Sophie is becoming ready to accept that lesson. She knows there will be difficult days ahead. She knows she cannot control her mother's illness. She knows she may experience grief in ways she cannot yet imagine. But she also knows that she has people who love her, dreams worth pursuing, and memories worth protecting. She has discovered that life can be painful without being meaningless. And perhaps that is the most important lesson of her journey. The young girl who once thought the stage was simply a place to perform now understands that the stage was teaching her how to live. It taught her to face an audience even when she was nervous. It taught her that mistakes can be survived. It taught her that emotions can be expressed rather than hidden. And most importantly, it taught her that every performance eventually ends, which is exactly why the moments inside it matter. Sophie carries that understanding with her. She does not know exactly what the next chapter will bring, but she is no longer demanding that the future give her guarantees. She is ready to live it. And as she looks toward the days ahead, Sophie finally understands what her mother has been trying to tell her all along. You cannot always choose how long a chapter lasts, but you can choose how much love, courage, and meaning you put into the pages while you are living them. As Sophie continues moving forward, the lessons from the musical begin affecting the way she sees herself. The experience has changed her relationship with theatre, but more importantly, it has changed her relationship with her own emotions. Earlier, Sophie often believed that she needed to hide her fears and remain strong for everyone around her. Now she understands that pretending to be okay does not make a difficult situation disappear. She begins allowing herself to be honest, even when the truth is uncomfortable. This becomes an important step in her transition from a teenager simply reacting to the circumstances around her into someone who is beginning to make conscious choices about the person she wants to become. At school, Sophie finds herself receiving more attention after the success of the musical. Her performance has impressed the people around her, and some classmates begin treating her differently. For a moment, Sophie enjoys the recognition. It feels good to know that all the hours of rehearsal and emotional effort were worth something. But she quickly realizes that applause is temporary. The real value of the experience was not the attention she received after the show. It was what she discovered about herself while preparing for it. Sophie begins thinking seriously about continuing with theatre. She understands that performing is not just something she enjoys. It is one of the ways she makes sense of the world. When she is on stage, she can take complicated emotions and turn them into something understandable. She can tell stories about people who are experiencing fear, love, disappointment, and hope. Her own experience has made her more sensitive to those emotions, and she starts wondering what kind of performer she could become if she continued developing her talent. But her ambitions also create another emotional conflict. Sophie worries that planning for the future might be painful if her mother cannot be there to see it. She sometimes imagines future moments and then immediately thinks about Elizabeth's illness. Instead of allowing herself to dream, she tries to stop the thoughts before they become too emotional. However, she remembers what her mother told her. The future should not be something she's afraid to imagine. That advice encourages Sophie to start making plans again. She begins thinking about what she wants after high school. She considers theatre programs, future performances, friendships, and the possibility of becoming more independent. For the first time since learning about her mother's illness, she allows herself to imagine a future that contains excitement instead of only fear. This does not mean Sophie has forgotten what is happening. In fact, her awareness of her mother's condition makes her dreams feel even more important. She understands that life is moving forward whether she is ready or not. If she wants to honor her mother's wishes, she cannot spend her entire future waiting for something terrible to happen. Elizabeth continues supporting her. She is proud that Sophie is becoming more independent, even though part of her wishes she could protect her daughter forever. Their conversations now have a different quality. Sophie is no longer simply asking her mother for reassurance. She is also beginning to understand Elizabeth's perspective. Sophie asks about her mother's own dreams and experiences. She wants to know what Elizabeth was like when she was younger, what she wanted from life, and what choices shaped her. These conversations help Sophie see her mother as more than the person who takes care of her. Elizabeth is an individual with her own history, regrets, hopes, and dreams. This discovery deepens their relationship. Sophie realizes that she has inherited more from Elizabeth than she previously understood. Some of her determination comes from her mother. Her emotional sensitivity, her sense of humor, and even her stubbornness have roots in the family. Thinking about this gives Sophie comfort because it means that Elizabeth's influence is already part of her. At the same time, Sophie begins to understand that she must become her own person. Loving her mother does not mean becoming exactly like her. Elizabeth wants Sophie to make her own choices, even choices that are different from what Elizabeth might have chosen. This is another part of growing up. The film therefore begins shifting from a story about a girl dealing with her mother's illness to a broader coming-of-age story. Sophie is learning that becoming an adult means accepting responsibility for your own choices, while still appreciating the people who helped shape you. Her friendships also continue developing. Sophie becomes more open with the people around her, and she no longer feels the need to hide everything that is happening at home. Some friends are unsure what to say, but their willingness to listen matters. Sophie discovers that support does not always require a perfect response. Sometimes, simply knowing that someone is there can make a difficult day easier. She also begins understanding that her friends have their own struggles. Previously, she sometimes compared their problems with hers and dismissed them because they seemed less serious. Now she realizes that everyone carries something. People may not always show their difficulties, just as she did not always show hers. This makes Sophie more compassionate. She becomes the kind of friend who listens, instead of immediately trying to solve problems. She understands that sometimes people do not need advice. They simply need someone who will stay beside them. This emotional maturity also affects the way she approaches conflict. When disagreements happen, Sophie is less interested in proving that she is right. She begins considering how other people might feel. Her own experiences have taught her that life can change unexpectedly, so she does not want to waste important relationships on unnecessary arguments. Meanwhile, theatre remains a central part of her life. Sophie begins looking at future performances differently. She no longer sees a role simply as an opportunity to become popular. She wants to understand the characters she plays and connect emotionally with the stories. Her experience with Waitress has shown her that acting can become deeply personal. She now wants to use that understanding to improve. Her teacher notices the change. Sophie is becoming more confident, but her confidence is no longer based on believing she can control everything. It comes from knowing that she can handle mistakes and difficult moments. She has learned that being prepared is important, but preparation cannot guarantee perfection. This is a lesson that extends beyond theatre. Sophie begins accepting that she cannot prepare for every possible event in her life. She can plan, work hard, and make responsible choices, but some things will remain outside her control. For someone who has spent so much time worrying about the future, this is a major emotional breakthrough. At home, Sophie also becomes more willing to enjoy ordinary moments. She does not constantly ask herself whether a moment might become a final memory. Instead, she tries to experience it while it is happening. This is difficult because the fear is still there, but she is learning not to let that fear take over. One day, she may laugh with her mother and forget about the illness for a few minutes. Another day, she may become overwhelmed by sadness. Both experiences are real. Sophie no longer believes that one emotion has to replace another. She can be happy and scared. She can be hopeful and realistic. She can be ambitious and vulnerable. She can be a daughter and an individual with her own future. This balance becomes the foundation of her emotional growth. Elizabeth's role in this transformation is crucial. She never wants Sophie to feel responsible for saving her. She wants her daughter to understand that love is not measured by how much suffering you are willing to endure. Love can also mean allowing someone to live. Elizabeth's message is simple. Sophie should not stop her life because of what might happen. Sophie slowly accepts that. She begins understanding that continuing with theatre, school, friendships, and future dreams is not selfish. It is exactly what Elizabeth wants for her. This gives Sophie a new reason to keep going. She starts thinking about what kind of person she wants to be. She wants to be someone who appreciates people while they are present. She wants to take opportunities, instead of constantly waiting for the perfect moment. She wants to tell people that she loves them rather than assuming they already know. And she wants to keep performing because theater makes her feel alive. Her mother's illness has taught her something that many people do not understand until much later. Time is not guaranteed. Because of that, Sophie begins valuing time differently. She becomes less interested in wasting days on things that do not matter. She wants meaningful conversations. She wants genuine friendships. She wants experiences that she will remember. She wants to continue growing. This does not mean she suddenly becomes perfectly mature. She is still a teenager. She still makes mistakes. She still becomes frustrated. She still has moments when fear takes over. The difference is that she now recognizes these emotions rather than allowing them to control everything. When fear appears, she can remind herself that she has survived difficult moments before. When sadness appears, she allows herself to feel it. When happiness appears, she lets herself enjoy it without guilt. That is perhaps her greatest achievement. The story also emphasizes that courage is not a single dramatic act. Sophie does not become brave because she gives one powerful performance. Courage is something she practices every day. It is getting out of bed when she is worried. It is going to school when she would rather stay home. It is talking honestly with her mother. It is continuing to pursue her dreams. It is allowing friends to support her. It is imagining a future even when the future feels uncertain. All of these small choices add up. Sophie begins to see herself as someone capable of handling uncertainty. She still wishes she could change her mother's situation, but she accepts that she cannot control it. Instead, she focuses on what she can control: the way she treats her mother, the memories they create, the way she responds to fear, and the choices she makes about her own future. This shift gives her a sense of peace she did not have earlier in the story. As the story continues, Sophie becomes increasingly aware that growing up does not happen all at once. There is no single moment when someone suddenly becomes an adult. It happens through hundreds of small realizations. For Sophie, those realizations have come through theater, friendship, family, fear, and love. She is still becoming the person she will eventually be. And perhaps that is what makes her journey so meaningful. She does not have all the answers. She does not know exactly what the future holds. She does not know how every problem will be resolved. But she no longer believes she needs all the answers before moving forward. She has learned to trust herself. She has learned to trust the people who love her. And she has learned to trust that even when life changes unexpectedly, she can continue. By the end of this part of the story, Sophie has found something more valuable than applause. She has found her own voice. Theater helped her discover it. Her mother helped strengthen it. And the challenges she has faced have taught her to use it honestly. The girl who once wanted to be seen on stage now understands that being seen is not the same as being understood. What matters is knowing who you are, expressing what you feel, and having the courage to keep becoming the person you want to be. Sophie looks toward the future with uncertainty, but also with hope. She knows that the next chapter may contain difficult moments. She knows that she cannot control every outcome, but she also knows that there will be music, friendship, dreams, laughter, memories, and opportunities waiting for her. And for the first time, she is not afraid to step toward them. As Sophie continues her journey, she begins to understand that moving forward does not mean leaving the past behind. The experiences she has shared with her mother, the lessons she has learned through theater, and the difficult emotions she has faced have all become part of who she is. At first, Sophie believed that becoming stronger meant finding a way to stop being afraid. Now she realizes that real strength means accepting fear and continuing anyway. She still has moments when she worries about Elizabeth and wonders what the future will bring, but those thoughts no longer completely control her life. Instead of spending every moment imagining what might happen, Sophie tries to focus on what is happening right now. This change is especially noticeable in the way she spends time with her mother. Earlier, Sophie sometimes became frustrated when Elizabeth avoided difficult conversations or tried to make everything seem normal. Now she understands why her mother behaved that way. Elizabeth was not trying to ignore the seriousness of the situation. She was trying to give Sophie a chance to experience happiness without constantly carrying the weight of fear. Sophie begins appreciating that intention. She realizes that some of the ordinary moments she once considered unimportant may eventually become the memories she treasures most. Sophie becomes more attentive to the little details of family life. She listens when her mother talks about her day, shares stories about school, and tells Elizabeth about her plans and dreams. These conversations are not always dramatic. Sometimes they are funny, sometimes awkward, and sometimes emotional. But Sophie begins to understand that meaningful relationships are built through these ordinary moments. Love is not only expressed during major events, it is also present in everyday conversations, small acts of kindness, and simply choosing to spend time together. At the same time, Sophie refuses to allow her mother's illness to completely define her identity. She remains passionate about theatre and begins thinking more seriously about her future as a performer. The experience of playing the lead in Waitress has given her confidence, but it has also taught her that performing requires honesty. She wants to continue developing that ability. She knows that there will be other auditions, other productions, other stages, and perhaps other opportunities she cannot yet imagine. The thought of continuing her theatre journey sometimes makes Sophie emotional because she wishes Elizabeth could be present for every future achievement. She imagines her mother sitting in an audience and watching her perform again. She imagines receiving advice afterward and hearing Elizabeth tell her what she did well. These imagined moments make Sophie sad, but they also motivate her. Instead of giving up on her dreams because the future is uncertain, she decides that she will pursue them even more seriously. Elizabeth encourages this attitude. She wants Sophie to understand that a person's love does not disappear simply because life changes. The values she has taught Sophie will remain with her. Her encouragement, her memories, and her belief in her daughter's abilities will continue influencing Sophie long after any individual moment has passed. Sophie slowly begins to understand that this is what parents ultimately give their children. Not a guarantee that life will always be safe, but the confidence to face life when it becomes difficult. This realization changes the way Sophie thinks about growing up. She used to imagine adulthood as something distant and exciting. Now she understands that becoming an adult also means accepting difficult truths. It means making decisions without always knowing whether they are correct. It means taking responsibility for your emotions and relationships. It means understanding that the people you love cannot always protect you from pain. But Sophie also realizes that growing up does not mean becoming cold or emotionally distant. She does not have to stop being sensitive simply because life is difficult. Her ability to feel deeply is actually one of her greatest strengths, especially as a performer. Her theatre experience has taught her that emotions can be transformed into something meaningful. Fear can become honesty. Sadness can become empathy. Love can become courage. Even uncertainty can become a reason to appreciate the present. At school, Sophie begins interacting with people differently. She is more willing to listen to her friends and less interested in comparing her problems with theirs. She realizes that everyone has experiences that other people cannot see. Someone who appears happy may be dealing with a difficult situation at home. Someone who seems confident may be struggling with insecurity. Someone who makes jokes all the time may be using humor to hide something painful. Sophie's own experience has taught her not to judge people too quickly. Her friendships become more genuine because she is willing to be vulnerable. She does not tell everyone every detail of her family situation, but she no longer feels that she has to pretend that everything is perfect. When she needs support, she allows herself to accept it. When she wants to laugh, she laughs. When she needs time alone, she takes it. This balance is important because Sophie is beginning to understand that healing does not require constant sadness. In fact, sometimes laughter can be part of healing. She starts enjoying ordinary teenage experiences again without feeling guilty. She talks with friends, thinks about relationships, focuses on school, and continues pursuing theatre. These moments are not distractions from her mother's illness. They are part of her life. Elizabeth would want her to live. Sophie finally understands that. The more she accepts this idea, the less she feels trapped between two versions of herself. The daughter who is worried about her mother and the teenager who wants to experience life. She realizes that these two identities do not have to compete. She can be both. She can care deeply about her family while still building her own future. She can experience fear while still pursuing her dreams. She can prepare for difficult possibilities while still appreciating happy moments. This becomes the emotional balance that Sophie has been searching for throughout the story. One of the most important things Sophie learns is that memories should not be created only because someone is afraid of losing them. She used to look at every moment with her mother and wonder whether it might be the last. That way of thinking made even happy moments painful. Now she tries to experience those moments naturally. Instead of constantly asking how long they have left, she asks herself what she can do with the time they have. That change makes her relationship with Elizabeth more peaceful. They begin sharing moments without constantly discussing illness. Sometimes they talk about Sophie's theatre plans. Sometimes they laugh about something that happened at school. Sometimes they simply sit together. Sophie learns that silence can also be meaningful when you are comfortable with someone. The story's theatrical metaphor becomes even stronger during this stage. Sophie has learned that an actor cannot control everything that happens during a live performance. A forgotten line, a technical problem, or an unexpected reaction from the audience can change the experience. Yet the actor continues. The performance does not stop simply because something goes wrong. Sophie realizes that life works in the same way. She cannot control every event. She cannot rewrite the past. She cannot guarantee the future, but she can decide whether she will continue participating in her own life. This becomes her greatest source of courage. Sophie also begins to recognize that there is no shame in needing help. Earlier, she wanted to appear strong because she thought her mother needed her to be strong. Now she understands that strength can include asking for support. Her friends, family, and teachers can help her carry some of the emotional weight. Nobody expects her to have everything figured out. She does not need to become an adult overnight. She is still allowed to be confused. She is still allowed to cry. She is still allowed to be excited about the future. This understanding gives Sophie permission to simply be herself. As she looks ahead, she starts imagining future performances. She wonders what kind of roles she might play and what stories she might tell. She remembers how performing helped her communicate feelings that were difficult to express in everyday life. She realizes that perhaps this is why theatre matters so much to her. It does not remove reality. Instead, it gives people a different way of understanding reality. Sophie wants to continue doing that. She wants to tell stories that make people feel something. She wants to become better at understanding other people's experiences. And she wants to carry the emotional honesty she discovered during the production into everything she does. Her mother remains central to this ambition. Elizabeth's encouragement becomes something Sophie carries internally. Even when she is not physically beside her, Sophie can remember what Elizabeth would tell her. Do not let fear decide what kind of life you live. That advice becomes almost like a personal rule. Whenever Sophie is tempted to stop herself because she is afraid, she remembers her mother's belief in her. Whenever she feels guilty about being happy, she remembers that Elizabeth wants her to live. Whenever she worries about the future, she reminds herself that she does not have to know everything yet. She only needs to take the next step. The story therefore moves toward a more hopeful emotional space without pretending that the difficult circumstances have disappeared. There is still uncertainty surrounding Elizabeth. Sophie still has fears about what may happen. But the difference is that Sophie no longer sees uncertainty as a reason to stop living. She sees it as a reminder to live more intentionally. The lessons of the musical remain with her. The stage taught her that every performance has a beginning and an ending. The important thing is what happens between those two moments. Life is similar. We cannot control how long every chapter will be, but we can make the moments within those chapters meaningful. Sophie now understands that her mother's love is part of her story. Regardless of what happens next, she carries that love into school. She carries it into theatre. She carries it into her friendships. And she carries it into her dreams. The girl who once feared that moving forward would mean leaving her mother behind now understands the opposite. Moving forward can be a way of carrying someone with you. Sophie does not need to forget her mother in order to grow. She does not need to stop missing her in order to be happy. She does not need to choose between remembering the past and building the future. She can do both. And this is where Sophie finally begins to find peace with the uncertainty surrounding her life. She may not know what the next chapter will bring, but she knows who she wants to be when she reaches it. Someone brave enough to love deeply, honest enough to admit when she is afraid, and strong enough to come down. And for the first time, she is ready to step into that life without demand.